Welcome to the SunPower by Stellar Solar SolarCast. I'm host David Boylan, and this week I'm joined by Michael Powers. He's the SunPower by Stellar Solar co-founder, and he's here to discuss Earth Day and its correlation with solar. Welcome, Michael.
Thank you. Welcome.
All right. So first off, let's discuss the history of Earth Day. When did it start? How did this thing happen?
My understanding, because that was before my time, but
Right.
In the 70s, right around during the when the Vietnam War was happening, it was seen as part of the peace movement to devote a day that was really going to be focused on the planet and what could be done with the planet. So the opposite of war being peace, and let's focus on what can we do with the planet. So I think it was in '69 that it was originally started by the United Nations, created a World Earth Day that was going to be on March 21st, so spring was kind of the first Earth Day. And then a year later, it was sort of put forward by one of the senators from, I think, Wisconsin to create a day. And it was going to be April 20th, I think was the very first Earth Day. So that was in 1970. And just a day devoted to teaching, providing more information about the planet and how well it was, what was its condition, its healthy condition. Right. And since that day, it's really kind of expanded and grown to accomplish a whole lot more.
Nice. So from what I understand, renewable energy is always kind of part of this movement. Can you reflect on the early days and what was going on with solar and the overall market at that, in the 70s when this was happening?
Well, I think technology has changed a lot, just as it has, in the last 40 years. Right. But initially, when people talked about solar, they were talking about solar hot water, which now goes by the name thermal solar, as opposed to what we do, which is photovoltaic solar, which is solar electricity, and or what they call passive solar, so ways of heating homes so they'd retain the heat. And so initially in the 70s, I think President Carter put solar on the White House, but it was solar hot water. And that was what was eventually removed. We really didn't see solar electric coming into its own until much later, and that's partly just because the technology was still evolving. And so in the 80s and 90s, that's when you really started seeing people being able to do solar. Was initially done in an off-grid situation where you were out in the someplace in a rural area where it was too expensive to run a wire all the way out there. So was there something we could do with solar panels to create power at that house? But it wasn't really on-grid solar until much later.
Nice. So over the past 20 years, both Earth Day and solar, they both evolved in the Earth Day into a major global event. And with solar, it's grown to a point where, especially in San Diego, homes and businesses are going solar in huge numbers. What do you think led to this, or what was some of the events that made them both explode, really?
Well, there are a couple of key events. I think the biggest was in the mid-'90s when the idea of net metering became popular, and California was one of the first states to allow an individual homeowner who was producing electricity on their house during some parts of the day, in the middle of the day, when you're producing a lot of power and the house isn't really using any, what do you do with the extra power? Well, storing it in batteries is one way to do it. At the time, that was way too expensive. It's getting a little more reasonable today. But what really net metering allowed you to do was to sell that power back to the power company, and they could take it and resell it, and you could do it for the same cash value. So in other words, anytime you were producing more power than you were using, the electric company would buy it and give you full cash value for that. And whenever you needed more, you just bought it back, and you only settled the account once a year. And that's net metering as we know it today. That really didn't happen until the late 90s. And now it's really in about 2/3 of all states have some form of net metering, which allows you to immediately sell that power that you're not using at full cash value or some fraction of that. And that was a game changer. That allowed the industry to grow, and as the volume increased, then the cost of the solar really started to decrease and become much more affordable. So right now you can get your initial investment back in about 5 or 6 years. Several years ago it was more like 10 or 12, but eventually you'd get your money back, and so the cost savings, in addition to doing the right thing for the planet, is really what drove the whole industry forward.
Right, and on top of that, there's a federal incentive, correct?
That's right, and in order to increase it for the states that weren't allowing the net metering, or where you had some challenges on that area, or parts of the country where we have coal-fired electricity, which is still really inexpensive. The Southeast, for instance, the Carolinas and Georgia, parts of Florida, most of the electricity is being produced with coal, and so it's really 3 or 4 cents a kilowatt hour. In order for solar to compete with that kind of price point, Here in California, it's more like 25 cents a kilowatt hour. So that's what the difference is. The only way the solar could be competitive on that basis was to offer a tax credit, something to make it less expensive as an initial investment.
Right. So, Earth Day is a great reminder, especially in today's political environment, that we only have one planet, and besides the obvious financial benefits of solar, it can play a key role in keeping our planet healthy. Can you elaborate on some of those benefits?
Well, the big one today is climate change. When
Right.
Earth Day started, the buzzword was pollution. We were trying to figure out how to cut pollution. And now we've seen that even carbon dioxide, which you wouldn't normally think to be a toxic gas, in fact, if there's too much of it, it'll kill us. And just that, trying to reduce that amount of CO2 is something that people who are environmentally conscious are pretty serious about. The thing is, there's only so many things you can do as an individual at the local level to make those changes. One of the easiest, best ones is to go solar, because when you put solar panels on your roof, 100% of your electricity is carbon free. So that means there's no CO2, there's no side effects that cause climate change whatsoever. And it's funny, interesting, people have asked the question, well, it costs a certain amount of energy to make the solar panels in the first place, right? And we just saw a study about 6 months ago that said that literally the amount of energy required to produce the solar panel in the first place, which might be coal-fired electricity, we don't know, it depends on where it's produced, you actually offset that within the first 4 years of using the solar panels. And so from that point on, in a 30, 40-year lifetime, you're producing a lot of electricity that has zero carbon associated with it.
Nice.
And that's the way you reduce your carbon footprint right now today.
I think that's a great way to put it. And just let's go out on an interesting fact that just happened. Wasn't there a museum that had something to do with coal that just went solar?
Not just any museum. It's the History of Coal Museum.
There you go.
In Kentucky.
That's awesome.
Is now solar powered.
And there you have it, folks. Even the coal people are going solar.
Yeah,
All
that's
right?
exactly right.
Right. Well, thanks.
Almost heaven, West Virginia, right?
Right, there we go. And there you have it, our Earth Day edition of the SunPower by Stellar Solar SolarCast with founding partner and solar industry expert Michael Powers. I'm host David Boylan, and join me next week when we talk solar aesthetics. Thanks, Michael, for doing this.